Okay, so in our previous slideshow, we had just talked our way up through the age of early television. And the age of early television ends with what's known as the network age. Okay, so the classic network age runs from 1955 to 1980. And that is an era of three network dominance. There is much less competition than actually even before this era, but especially after 1980. So this era is all about ABC, NBC, CBS. And in most cities, there will be some independent station, but they basically just have reruns, syndicated programs, and have much smaller audiences. By the end of the 60s, we start to have public television, which is important, but still much less viewership. And then 1980 is when the cable era starts. So, in our network age, what is TV like? What guides TV production? What do we need to know as television critics? Well, one thing we need to know is that overall, the programming strategies are about appealing to as many people as possible in most cases. All right? At least up into the early 70s, TV executives are thinking about getting TV shows that will appeal to the broadest audience. And that's quite different from what we live with today. Okay? So, two programming strategies: least objectionable program and least common denominator. Now, these strategies really have to do with thinking about how is it people watch TV. In the network era, there just weren't a lot of choices. So the idea was, well, when people watch TV, they sit down and they want to do this thing. They want to watch TV. I'm making quotation marks with my fingers and you can't see it. But this is different from sitting down to watch a very particular program, right? So actually, when you think about like nowadays, when we talk about, let's Netflix and chill, right? Like, it's the activity. We're just going to find something on Netflix rather than a particular program, right? Okay, so least objectionable program. This was a theory that people sit down and they go through their channels and they're just looking for the thing that is the least objectionable to them. They're not really looking for something they really want to watch, just the thing that annoys them the least. Okay? Related to this is the least common denominator. This is the idea that you can't make TV that's too smart, too complicated, because you're reducing your audience. You need to incorporate elements that are going to appeal to the broadest number of people as possible. Okay, so when you hear me describe these things, maybe you can see the roots of why television traditionally hasn't been thought of as being a very artistically productive or fruitful medium. Instead, it was really a commercial medium that was about appealing to as many people as possible with the broadest possible approach you could take. That doesn't mean there weren't some, high quality things that did get produced. It just explains what the thinking was, right? As critics, we need to we're thinking about television as artistic or literary or at least creative products, right? But they're also commercial products. And for much of its history, the idea was we want to make things that appeal to as many people as possible, and this is how we're going to do it. Now, we get to the next phase. We have the rise of cable TV. So note I'm calling this the rise of cable because it isn't like immediately cable comes around, everybody has it, and they produce lots of programming. That's not the case. It takes a number of years, really up until the mid-90s, for cable to become dominant. Now, cable TV exists for a long time, and it comes from this thing called community antenna television. And the idea with community antenna television is that you have parts of the country, towns that are isolated, and it isn't possible for people to get access to over-the-air TV with their own antenna. So in those places, they would build like these huge antennas to serve the community, and then everyone in the community would have a cable connected to that antenna so they could get content. All right? And now everyone would pay to have that service. Now, up until the 80s, the networks actively lobbied to prevent other kinds of content besides their own to be available through cable. They did not want competition. But by the 1980s, with the other kinds of deregulation that were going on in the Reagan regime, cable was one of the things that was deregulated. So now you could have cable in places where that you could get over-the-air signals, and you could have new content on cable. So that's what started the rise of cable television, and slowly more competition for broadcast TV. Now, pause for a second. Don't worry, broadcast networks did fine. They just adapted. They created their own cable networks. Just like now they create their own streaming services, right? But for our purposes, what happens that's so important that impacts what TV shows are like is that you start having a shift away from broadcasting towards narrowcasting. That means you are more narrowly defining who your audience is. Great success story from these years, the rise of cable TV, is MTV, which once upon a time was called music television. Not anymore, it's just MTV. Once upon a time it was called music television because it focused on music videos. That was what 99% of its content was music videos and then some live concerts. Now, the whole reasoning for this wasn't because they just loved music and they wanted to have a TV channel with music. It was because they wanted to appeal to young audiences, 12 to 34. And music, they decided, was the way to do that. Another couple of success stories from the early cable TV years. Lifetime. Lifetime was television for women. Nickelodeon, television for kids. ESPN, sports TV. So that's the story of the rise of cable, a shift to narrowcasting. Now, by the 1990s, we get into what's known as the post-network TV era. And by this time, the multi-channel television environment is the dominant quality of TV. There aren't just 3 broadcast channels. There are multiple cable channels that are producing content as well, and not just rerunning stuff off the networks. Okay? So that's the main quality of this. There's more competition that has to do with cable channels producing. This goes all the way up to the early 2000s. Another key thing that happens in this era is the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which reduces a lot of the controls on ownership so that you have more consolidation in who it is that owns TV channels. And despite this, though, in this post-network era, the way the economics of television work is still like it was in earlier eras. That is, it is a commercial model. Overwhelmingly, people in TV make money by providing eyeballs to advertisers. That's going to change, okay? But this post-network TV era, just like the rise of cable, just like the classic network era, even the early TV era, primarily the money comes from a commercial model of sponsorship. That is, selling commercials to advertisers, showing how many people are watching TV in order to sell commercials. All right, now that gets us to our current era, the convergence era, we're going to call it, where you don't just have lots of different channels like in the multi-channel era. You also have multiple platforms, different places to be watching TV, online, on your phone, on your computer, on your TV at home, right? On streaming platforms, on television itself, okay? And the viewer has more and more power. We can time shift. We can watch things when we want to watch them. And we can watch on different platforms, right? We can watch on our actual TV, or we can wait and we can wait a couple days and watch it later, or we can wait years and watch the entire episode, wait until we can binge the entire series, right? Other aspects of the convergence era is, from an industry perspective, there are additional revenue streams. It's not just about advertising. Increasingly, the people that bring us television, those networks own the content, as well as, of course, the most important force in television today, streaming services and new networks like Netflix or Amazon Prime, right? These new services are competing with the traditional networks, whether they're broadcast or cable. And those networks themselves, of course, are now developing their own streaming services. Okay, so we'll talk more about this when we get to how people make money in television.